Well, look, an inquiry was promised 12 months ago. The ex-police commissioner McGrail stood down 14 months ago, despite the fact that an inquiry was promised 12 months ago, and despite the fact that the Chief Minister said in Parliament that it would take weeks to establish, nothing has happened. So we're making clear today that if elected to government at the next election, we will have an inquiry. We will set one up into the circumstances of the early departure of the police commissioner, because we think there's more than meets the eye and hasn't reached the public domain.
Well, I was going to ask you that. Is it that you believe that there's more than meets the eye, or is it the lack of information that concerns you?
Well, several things have reached the public information, and it's important to put that in context. First of all, we know that the ex-police commissioner was invited to retire by the police authority with the consent of the Chief Minister and the Governor. We also know, because that was answered in Parliament, that the Chief Minister discussed with the Governor forcing the suspension or resignation of the ex-police commissioner if he didn't retire. We then know that he retired, but he issued a statement, a public statement saying that there should be an inquiry, calling for an inquiry, and saying that if there wasn't an inquiry, it would be bad for democracy in Gibraltar. This was serious and unprecedented. For an ex-police commissioner to say that, to call for an inquiry, that clearly implies that there's more than meets the eye, that hasn't reached the public domain, and it clearly requires a serious and full independent investigation.
There has been a lot of speculation muddying the waters. Has this actually influenced your decision to call for an inquiry?
Well, look, the waters are indeed muddy indeed, because there has been no transparency. Despite many questions in Parliament, we really did not get to the nub of what had transpired, except we know that there's been an invitation to retire, and there was a discussion as to forcing his suspension or resignation. We know that the police commissioner has called for an inquiry. So we know all that. We have waited patiently. When the Chief Minister said that he would have a public inquiry, we waited patiently. We've repeated our call for there to be an inquiry, for the government to get on with it. But look, 12 months on, nothing has happened. The judge to lead the inquiry has not been appointed. Once the judge is appointed, the judge can get on with it. But until the government takes that step, and that step is in the hands of the government, then nothing will happen. And look, the delay is unacceptable. There is a serious and unprecedented call by the ex-police commissioner for an inquiry that needs a full and independent investigation in the interest of democracy, in the interests of our constitutional safeguards. It needs an inquiry, and if the government is not going to do it, if they're going to delay, the message today is that a GSD government would hold an inquiry.
Well, the government will say it hasn't exactly been twiddling its thumbs. It's had to look after COVID, and of course it is dealing with the treaty on Gibraltar's future relationship with the EU.
I make allowances, of course, for all of that. But when the government wants, it takes steps. So all they need to do is appoint a judge to get on with the inquiry. The government doesn't need to do more than that. It then steps back and lets the judge get on with it. So that's all they need to do. So let's be serious about what the government actually needs to do and needed to do in the last 12 months, which was only to appoint the judge to lead the independent inquiry, because once that happens, the judge can get on with it. So that's really not an excuse for the government to simply say, well, we've had COVID and we've had the treaty and so on. When the government wants, it actually takes the steps it needs to do. And in this particular case, it's not a significant one.